I'm Dr. Julian Vickers, and I want to talk a little bit about diets. And I'm going to talk specifically about three different diets. One is the standard American diet, which we refer to as the SAD diet. The second one is just talking about fad diets that are really popular these days. And thirdly, talking about what is generally known as the Mediterranean diet, or really should be called just a typical, normal, healthy diet. Now, let me start with the SAD diet, or the standard American diet. If we go back 500, 1,000 years ago, most of the food we're eating was not eaten by our ancestors. They ate food that was just natural off the land. They ate game animals, they ate ocean fish. They were hunters and gatherers. So all the food that they had was absolutely natural, very, very clean. And when our ancestors were hunters and gatherers, they were the fittest they have ever been in all of the history that's recorded. Now, as we come into today, we went through this whole food revolution in the US where everything became processed and easy. Even when we go into the health food stores, we find the easy little packages of stuff that you just microwave. Now, one of the keys is every time you process food, you lose a certain amount of the food value of that. Every time you throw chemicals on it, every time you do anything, anytime any human being touches it, you actually lose a little bit of the food value of that food. Now, when we look at things like white wheat, when we look at things like processed everything, one of the wonderful things is oatmeal. Do you realize that about 80% of the oatmeal in the US is not even consumed by humans? It's consumed by animals. Oatmeal comes in many shapes. You got the raw oatmeal all the way up to the 1-minute oatmeal. There's about 6 different processing steps through there. Every time you process the oatmeal, you lose a certain amount of the nutritive value of that oatmeal. And when you get up to the point where it's 1-minute oatmeal, it's almost a worthless food. Another thing is the meat supply that we have in this country. If you look at the meat supply, the beef that is grown down in Texas or pretty much anywhere where they're grown huddled together in stalls, the body fat percentage of that beef is about 30%. That same animal in the wild, body fat percentage is about 6. Huge difference. Plus, it's very interesting that the animals that are grown in the stalls like that are fed grains. Grains have omega-6 oils in it. So what you have is an animal that only has omega-6 oils. Okay, omega-6 oils are very inflammatory in the body. The omega-3 oils reduce inflammation and are the healthy ones. Now, where do the omega-3 oils come from? Everybody knows they come from fish. How do they get into the fish? Do they just show up in fish as opposed to beef? Actually, no. Omega-3 oils come from green sources. Omega-6 oils come primarily from grains. Fish eat algae. There's algae in the sea that starts the food chain, and that's the only source of food in the sea is green-based food. That is why fish are all omega-3 based. When you start feeding animals grain, that animal becomes primarily omega-6 oils in its body. If you take that same animal and put it out in a grass-fed, free-range area, the balance between omega-3 and 6 is much, much different, and it's a much healthier animal. So when we look at these processed foods, we are getting inflammatory diets, we are getting complete lack of nutritive value in our food. Then we throw in some of these fad diets. You start getting the Atkins, the high fat, the low fat, the this, the that, and the other thing. And you start monkeying around with all of these already processed foods, where you're taking one food group and focusing on it and ignoring all the others. There is no way that the body can survive healthily on that. Atkins diet loses weight. People lose a lot of weight on it. It's very, very successful. But what you end up being is a much skinnier and far sicker person at the end. That is not where we want to go. That is one of the reasons that people, when they go on those fad diets, they just bounce right back into their weight again and usually gain even more because you're starving your body of proper nutritive food. Now, if we look at the Mediterranean diet, which everybody's talking about as being healthy these days, what does the Mediterranean diet consist of? It just consists of food. It's as simple as that. Food the way it landed on the face of the earth. Unadulterated tomatoes that actually grow on a tomato plant, as opposed to hanging upside down and sprayed with water on the roots, the hydroponic tomatoes, which are basically flavorless and have so little nutritive value it's not even funny. Fruit that just grows on trees the way it has 1,000 years. Animals that are free range, fish from the ocean. That's the Mediterranean diet. It's just simply food the way it's been on this face of this earth for 1,000 years without being messed with. Now, an interesting little thing that happened, I was talking to a research scientist who works in the nutrition industry, and he was back in the Midwest talking to a cousin of his a few years ago, and the cousin was talking about the fact that he was probably going to lose his farm pretty soon, because the drought that they had just had left him about a 50% yield in the corn that he used to feed his hogs. And he said, you know, I can't afford any more corn. He said, probably by the end of this season, I'm going to be out of business. And he called up my friend who's the researcher a few months later and said, the funny thing happened. He says, when I feed this corn, which is half the size of the normal corn, to the animals, they eat half as much as they used to. He says, this small, tiny corn is going to last me the entire season. What do you make of it? And he said, hey, send me a few samples of it, and send me some of the samples of the old corn if you have it left over. He said, sure. So they sent them in. And what they found is that the nutrient density in that small corn that had been grown through a drought was more than double the nutrient density of the old corn from a previous year. It's very interesting. Plants, when they're stressed, when they grow in a natural environment where they have to fend for themselves, that's where they develop this nutrient density. Now, the nutrient density I'm talking about are all these little phytochemicals in plants that only occur when the plant grows in a natural environment. As soon as you take away all the bugs, the sunlight, all of the other things that the plant has to protect itself against, it does not develop these chemicals, these little phytonutrients that are essential to our health. So when a plant, plants don't really do much. They just grow in the ground. They can't run away from anything. They can't hide from the sun. They really can't do much of anything. They have to produce chemicals to protect them against the sun. They have to produce chemicals to protect them against bugs, against wind, against all of the things that they're exposed to. Those little chemicals that they produce are the phytonutrients that feed us. So when you're looking at food, the food that is just grown in nature, the way it's been grown for 1,000 years, is highly nutritive. It gives us everything that we need. So let's get away from all these fad diets. Let's get away from the processed food and just eat food the way it was grown on the face of the earth. That is the real diet. That's the diet that should be the standard American diet. Thank you.